good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar. It's my pleasure to host this discussion on socio-emotional learning on the occasion of Children's Day, which is celebrated in India at November 14th. And as part of the Children's Day week celebration, happy Children's Day to the inner child and all of us. And when it comes to happiness, the Dalai Lama is famously known to have said happiness is not just about, it's also dependent on your actions. So, and that can be a very contentious statement, but that is what also gives us sort of an opening to think about measuring socio-emotional learning, which is quite a critical thing that governments, education organizations, parents, teachers, educators, everybody is focusing on, specifically given the decade we are in. So welcome again, and we are very privileged to have with us a bunch of experts who have worked on this across various countries and various diverse contexts. So quick introduction, I am Siddhesh. I've been working with Leadership for Equity and have been interested in education research and programs for quite some time now. And I've been fortunate enough to be joined by these experts. I request Anirudh to start his introductions and then slowly hand it over to Noemi and Shalaka.
Thank you so much, Adesh. Hi everyone, my name is Anirudh. I currently work as the Director for Monitoring Evaluation in Tech with Leadership for Equity. I've been engaged with LFE for almost 4 years now in different capacities, and look forward to the discussion to kind of talk about the CHISSEL tool that we kind of developed in partnership with Flame University, also to show some of our findings. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. Over to Shalaka.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and happy Children's Day. I'm really very happy to be a part of this webinar and basically involving myself in the research for social emotional learning. I think we all sort of engage in different activities related to social emotional learning, but this research opportunity just made it more serious and more methodological for me. I work with Flame University for last 5.5 years. I'm an assistant professor for psychology, a trained counseling psychologist, and also a certified competency developer. So I think all what I've been doing for all these years, I think has just narrowed down very well in this research, and has been a fantastic journey with LFE, working very closely with Siddesh, Anirudh, Shiv Kumar as well. So yeah, thanks for having me today. Over to you, Naomi.
Thank you. Thank you, Siddesh, for the invitation to this webinar. It's my pleasure to be with you. Today, my name is Noémie Ledonné. I lead the work on social emotional skills at the OECD. The OECD is an international organization. Over to you, Siddesh.
Thanks. So let's begin with, we have limited time and let's dive right in. I want to, before we get into the discussion and so on, it would be helpful if both of you can help frame what is our vantage point or definition in the way we are looking at social emotional learning. There have been various definitions and framing that has been floated, specifically by the CHISSEL framework and by various organizations, including the UNESCO, OECD. So based on the different studies that both of you have conducted, it would be great to know what is the specific way in which we are framing social emotional learning for today's discussion. Maybe Noemi will start with you and then go to Shalaka. Okay, there seems to be a glitch on Noemi's end. Shalaka, why don't you begin and we'll have Noemi in when she joins.
Sure. I think social emotional learning is the way we see it, especially in the Indian context, and especially for children. I think we always speak a lot about academic success, and most of the functioning related to children is just tied up with academic success. But social emotional learning is something that empowers a child to be self-aware, is able to regulate themselves to a certain extent, depending on their age, is able to communicate well. When we say communication, it is about oral communication, it is about the social appropriateness, and also is able to play along with other children well, has certain amount of emotional resilience, and is also, in general, a happy child, right? Because we started with happiness. I think it's very, very difficult to define happiness, but I think social emotional skills are primary when it comes to understanding yourself and also understanding others in the process. Over to you, Naomi.
Yes, so yeah, thanks for the question. At the OECD, we consider social emotional skills as holistic skills. Those skills, they underpin everything people do. They matter. It matters whether someone can actively engage and have a good relationship with other people. It also matters whether someone can effectively recognize but also regulate their emotions. It also matters if someone can focus on tasks, get things done. And it also matters whether someone can engage with new ideas and also learn from new experiences. So these are the 5 domains of skills that we are measuring as part of the OECD survey on social emotional skills. And there is a growing body of research for academic learning, but also significant predictors of labor market outcomes, employment outcomes. They are also related to individuals' health and well-being. So they are really important ingredients of peaceful, cohesive, prosperous societies. And we know that we are living in a world of increasing invest in those skills. And at the OECD, we also acknowledge that many education systems have a responsibility to now recognize and promote those skills. And so since we need to assess them. And so this is why at the OECD, we have established the largest survey of social emotional skills to be able to assist countries with this goal now of measuring those skills.
Got it. Thank you, Noemi. Just to expand a bit further, I get that it is important, and I get that these skills that we're talking about are age-old ideas of human existence itself. It's very important, and that for us to lead a harmonious life, these concepts need to be worked on, and this has typically been part of some spiritual domain and so on. But now we're talking about them in an educational domain, in a teachable sense. So why is it really important to talk about them now, and why is it important specifically in the domain of measuring them in this particular contemporary times?
I think social emotional skills are those skills that make us of artificial intelligence. So we will need them even more as many of the typical tasks will be automatized. So we will need to build on those skills to actually be able to make the best of artificial intelligence and complement the task performed by artificial intelligence in the future. So that's one thing. More and more important. There is actually a report by the OECD predicting that the skills that will be the most in need in the future will be management skills, business skills, capacity to innovate, capacity to lead new initiatives, capacity to be assertive, to find creative solutions, and so on, and also being able to interact with people and also with digital tools. I also think that we had countries like Ukraine participate in the survey on social emotional skills, and we were able to merge the data collection social emotional skills in students in Ukraine, so in a time of war. And so we provided a baseline for them, and they will be able to monitor the development of those skills over time. And we know that the country is still in war, and so I think we provide very useful information about skills that are extremely important in a world where you need to build a society that will be cohesive, and so on. So I would say that yes, we live in a time, and I haven't talked about the COVID pandemic, But we know that those skills have also declined during the pandemic. This is also findings from our survey. That they have declined over the last few years, and the well-being of children has declined, and so it's really important to tackle those skills right now.
Thanks. Shalaka, any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I think that's a great answer. And I think the pandemic and the other, environmental factors have affected the Indian context as well. But I think sort of contextualizing this in the Indian, scenario, I think we do have education policies that put the onus on the educators in order to develop the social emotional skills. The only issue is about the implementation, right? So how do we implement it? So I think having a good methodology and having assessments which are easily doable, especially when it comes to the Indian context. We have a large diversity when it comes to regional languages, when it comes to different castes, different communities, rural, urban, semi-urban, all these different environments. I think it would be really important to see how the socio-emotional learning is developing in these specific contexts, and then cater to the gaps in a systematic way. Another thing is also, I feel, why now and why not before? Of course, I agree with Siddesh, because these are absolutely basic skills, and that's why socio-emotional skills are very easily synonymously used with life skills. These are very, very important throughout the lifespan. We are starting with children, of course, because they're still malleable and it's possible to sort of teach these skills and inculcate, specific aspects of these skills. But in general, I feel it's important to focus on developing these now. The reason is that we also want the students to be future ready. It's so diverse, and it's so the times are changing. The careers that we started with as adolescents, probably they don't exist anymore, and in another 2 years new kinds of work related aspects would change and new kinds of careers would emerge. So what we also are trying to do through social emotional learning is build this overall tolerance and also emotional resilience in children, so that they are able to adjust to different environments with less stress, right? Children also at their age have their own stresses. What's important is to teach them that stress is a part of our life. How do we deal with it, right? How do we manage ourselves so that we can still achieve what we want to achieve in spite of the hurdles that we come across?
Thanks, both of you. Really important perspectives. One thing which I wanted to add, which I've heard in other spaces where social emotional learning is discussed, is this lens of adversity. We know that there are some estimates which say 1 in 3 children in India have undergone what they call ACE, adverse childhood experiences. Across the world, people are living in poverty, in conflict zones. So adversity is a big part of the majority of the world population. And traditional methods of teaching, learning might not be effective for them to learn the way maybe people who did not experience adversity did. So social emotional skills and learning is a necessary component and not just an add-on to engage children and to engage young people across different communities and experiences, so that they can also be a part of society the way and build society the way we envision that. So that's something that I came across and I found very powerful. But let's go on to the aspect of methods, which I think one of you mentioned, and maybe Anirudh can come in on start us off on this. There are various ways to go about doing this, where you can and across the board it's well acknowledged that the tools that exist are either a teacher reported or child reported or an observer reported, but all of them have some sort of constraint in one way or the other. But how did we go on in both of these studies to address the question of method? How do we begin this task of measurement?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, largely, I think both Naomi and Shalaka covered the need for why SEL measurement was important, right? I think COVID just kind of accelerated this entire thing from an Indian context, and especially in the jurisdictions that we were kind of working in. I think measurement was one of the first things that we kind of thought of, because there were a lot of programs that were being run, both initiated by the government, initiated by NGOs like us and other partners as well. And what we found were the tools that were already there, like the CHISSEL framework, for example, were not necessarily contextualized to an Indian format or the Indian setting at large. And I think one of the first things that we had done was kind of understand how is it that we can borrow from elements from tools that have already been developed, and then kind of see and place them in the Indian context, and also then determine if the results that we're kind of getting from them are largely applicable in the Indian setting or no. The idea here was that we want to kind of develop a tool that can be something that can be easily brought into the classroom, something that the teachers could also kind of use and bring in, that would give them a broad understanding in terms of the different components that are there, in terms of what their focus areas, etc., need to be. So that was largely in terms of the methodology that we kind of followed, in terms of just kind of seeing if we can borrow from elements that were already well established and bringing them into the Indian context, and then kind of ensuring that we can over the 2-year period come up with a reliable and a valid tool that can be now contextualized from an Indian setting and also be borrowed into the classroom directly from a teacher standpoint.
Thanks. Shalaka, do you want to just elaborate on, choice of tool and expand on it before we
Right.
go to the OECD study?
Right. Yes. As very rightly pointed out by Anirudh, I think he very broadly mentioned, our approach towards the method. So as it was mentioned in this webinar before as well, we of course had to start with CASEL, because that is the broadest sort of way of looking at the SEL, and also the clear definitions that they have provided about each domain. I think that was really very helpful to sort of bring it in the Indian context. We also chose to focus on the Indian educational frameworks like Nipun Bharat policies or NEP 2020 as well, the National Curriculum Framework 2023, which sort of helped us to see the Indian education system. They, in these policy briefs, they have also talked about certain gaps, and they have also mentioned clear directives of how we can proceed with sort of improving these areas. So that was immensely helpful. Also, I think considering my formal training in psychometric testing as a psychologist, the tool had to go through a rigorous statistical procedure. So we had two versions of this scale. Just to elaborate on it, the scale is called Children's Scale for Social Emotional Learning, and the short form or the abbreviation is CHISSEL. And we really love this name because we actually are trying to use this CHISSEL to shape students' personalities and carve out the best in them. So we had 2 rounds of extensive data collection, and thanks to Anirudh, I think it was of course there were challenges, but we did get very, very good data. So what we focused on is the 5 domains that we started with, 5 domains that were mentioned by CASEL: self-management, decision-making, self-awareness, social awareness, and relationship skills. And then we, of course, ran the statistical processes like the basic reliability analysis. Then we also ran exploratory factor analysis. And for the second round, after some changes in certain items, especially related to self-awareness, because I think self-awareness in general is very difficult to measure in the statement form. Also considering the age group that we targeted, which were students from 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, we had to be very careful about the language, what kind of statements, also the length of the survey in general. So we had decided to not go beyond 30 items, considering their attention span and other aspects. And the main important part here was the translation. So we didn't want the translation of the tool to sort of take away the core meaning for every statement. So I think that process was also rigorously followed. We had, of course, language experts, but we also had the last round of tool sort of item finalization by the enumerators themselves. Because again, even if we say language experts, that language again is a very standardized language, but within the local areas, again, a specific vocabulary is used, and the specific vocabulary is not easily understood, right? So all those, aspects we paid attention to. And also because we are talking about method, I think it was also very important to to have a self-report tool. And as Siddesh already mentioned, whatever is available in the Indian context, it's largely observation-based, and these observations are done by teachers. In no way we are saying that these are not important, but we also want the students to sort of learn to reflect and also analyze their situations and also be able to record those based on whatever response scale we have given. I think this is the most important exercise, starting from age, I don't know, 4 or 5, and I do that also with my son. He is in 4th standard and 10 years old. The habit of reflecting is very, very important. And again, articulating what you have reflected. So from that sense, I think a self-report tool would be very, very important. And that is what our approach was overall for the surveys.
Thanks, Shalaka. Noemi?
Yeah, well, I see a lot of commonalities between the approach you described and ours. Of course, at the OECD, the intentions for the survey on social emotional skills was to build a tool that will provide internationally comparable data. I would like to share as the survey. We have 2 cohorts, which are both age-based. And we administered the survey in more than 20 countries. So this makes another challenge for us to ensure that we have comparable information. Of the framework, actually, I mentioned that we build it based on 5 domains, from the personality psychology research. And the reason for this is because we found that this description of behaviors was tested empirically in many countries and was found to be quite universal. So we had a good reason actually to work with that framework, and we decided to adapt it to make sure we were measuring skills. So that's about the framework. Also a very thorough process to make sure that the tool was fit for use in all these countries. So what we typically do at the OECD for any of our surveys, not only the survey on social emotional skills, but also, like, for instance, the PISA assessments and other surveys of this kind, we do first a translatability assessment. So we check whether the item content is relevant in all cultures. We also review, for idiom because we usually develop the source questionnaires and assessments in English, so we need to be very careful about that. And then we had a multicultural team of experts that took a close look at the source questionnaire, and that's very different background. Translatability issues in mind. And then we conduct expert translation adaptation in all countries. And then we also have a contractor responsible for verifying the quality of the translations and working with the national teams to make sure that the translation and adaptations lead to an equivalent meaning across the different countries. Then we have several steps to test the assessment. So we conducted a cognitive interview areas of the world. We also piloted the instruments twice. And so we collected data, and then we performed psychometric analysis. We examined in particular measurement equivalence, so whether we can consider that the skills we measure are actually assessment of social emotional skills. So this is an innovation with the goal of, trying to reduce some of the biases that we have when we use self-reports. And in the first round, we also introduced anchoring vignettes. This was to improve cross-cultural comparability The idea was to control for possible reference bias across countries. Actually, the effect of using these anchoring vignettes was this is just to share that there are many steps that we take to try to minimize, cultural bias across countries. Of course, it's always impossible to reach like perfect equivalence across all countries, but yeah, it's better to prevent than to cure, and so that's the approach we take at the OECD. Over to you.
Thanks, Noemi. There are certain glitches in the middle, but we were able to largely follow that. This is a rigorous process based on a personality, empirically established personality traits, but we are distinguish it from personality, making it into teachable skills. And we're also following a detailed steps to contextualize, translate, and ensure that it is relevant before rolling it out. So that is really good. I think we'll now shift our focus. I think we have spoken a lot about the importance, how we went about doing it. I think people will be eager to know what we have actually found. What does two surveys taken in very different contexts, one across 6 countries or 16, I think, regions, and one in across various regions in Maharashtra. So let's maybe we'll start with CHISSEL and look at what have been some of the key findings of the study and what stands out. What are some surprises while we talk about how children are doing, how well they are doing today.
Anirudh, do you want to start or?
You can go. Should I share the screen as well with the slides?
So let me speak about the broad things, and then you can share the screen, and then we can add the nuances. So let's first start with what we expected, right? I mean, as researchers and as people who are having so many questions, we were expecting the kind of students that were involved in the research. These were from government schools, from rural and urban areas, across 6, 7, 8 jurisdictions across Maharashtra. So we were in fact expecting lower SEL scores, right? And we were really surprised to not find very low SEL scores. So this is ironical, because this is like a doctor expecting that he or she should have more patients, and actually you shouldn't have, right? Because ultimately you want people to be healthy. But we did we did deliberate a lot on what could be the reasons. And I think the overall exposure that this generation gets through media, through their school system, I think that probably is one of the reasons why we got sort of similar results across the jurisdictions. And we were also surprised to see that both the studies, the first study was in 2022 with the sample being 1,647, and the second study was in 2023 with students almost 3,575. Still, there was not much difference, right? And of course, these were different kinds of schools. We did not approach the same schools again in the study too. So that was a bit of a surprise, that how come we don't see lower scores. But of course, after the granular analyses, we did find that certain areas within the socio-emotional domains had lower scores as compared to others. So we saw that self-awareness, for example, was lowest across both the studies. On the other hand, relationship skills or social awareness was consistently higher, right? So the students were well aware of their social surroundings, their support systems, their social systems, that they could approach, a family member, or they could approach a teacher in case of any issues. So the awareness when it comes to the social aspects was higher. Also, when it comes to relationship skills, I think they had higher scores as compared to self-awareness. I think decision-making was the second one with lower scores as compared to the other domains. Also considering the age, of course, they're not like super experienced with decision making, but the items were something like, if someone asks me to do something that is wrong, will I be able to do that or not, right? Or am I able to, choose who to spend time with, or am I able to choose small decisions that children need to take. I think in the Indian context also, we need to understand the parental influence in general on children. Until, I don't, even if we are adults, our parents still are telling us what to do and what not to do. So I think decision making starts pretty late, considering the cultural aspects in the Indian context. That could be one of the plausible reasons. Another important aspect that we found were that there were gender differences, and we ran t-tests, and we also found that that female students in general had higher scores on SEL as compared to boys, except for the life skills perspective. So the life skills we try to measure under three subdomains: leadership, problem solving, and digital literacy. So boys probably had more access to digital devices, were slightly better when it comes to problem solving and also showing, leadership skills. But apart from life skills, all the other domains like socio-emotional development, social support, self-management, peer support, female, participants had significantly higher SEL scores. So gender differences we were expecting, but we were like really very curious to see which areas. And yeah, I mean, also if you see the developmental psychology, studies, they also um, mention about, girls sort of showing mature behavior slightly earlier than boys as compared to, the older, age range. So maybe the same results. We need to see if an older, age group we consider, let's say in 8th, 9th, 10th, if we consider that, then we'll have to again compare and see. Over to you, Anirudh.
Yeah, I mean, you've largely covered the findings, but I think
Okay.
what was also kind of interesting for us was that based on prior research, I think the Teacher Foundation had also done a detailed SEL study. And I think one of the things that they had found there was that, at least based on the components from the CHISSEL framework, they kind of asked teachers and students to both kind of report on what they would rate in terms of the most preferred kind of competency that they would like to focus on. I think the teachers had also rated self-awareness to be the lowest preferred competency from a student standpoint. And the students themselves have rated decision-making and self-awareness as the least preferred competencies that they would think are important for their own personal growth. I think that kind of was something that our study kind of substantiated in terms of the findings, that we found quite similar results. And also the fact that the entire self-awareness piece was extremely large in terms of variation. We had a lot of students in the lower quartile, and we had a lot of students in the upper quartile as well. So that's what the result kind of showcased. But yeah, lastly, in terms of studies, we just have one quick slide to kind of showcase these differences in terms of the gender perspective that Shalaka just kind of spoke of. Just give me a second, please. Yeah, can you see my screen? So yeah, so like Shalaka said, like for example, life skills, which is purely the digital literacy piece, is where male participants kind of show a little bit more significant performance, at least from a self-rating standpoint or self-reporting standpoint as compared to female participants. But everywhere else, female participants tend to kind of outperform boys, especially when it comes to things like academic awareness and emotional development, where the differences were quite large. But largely in terms of the competency indexes that we had, sorry, yeah, the competency indexes that we had, these are the ranges in terms of the male-female scores and the differences that we saw in terms of their performance. So yeah, these were the results from the study that kind of showcased what the current learning levels, or what the current SEL competency levels are of the students from a Maharashtra context.
So if you can simplify it for the viewers, I mean, this is a bit technical. In one or two statements, what I am taking away is that, by and large, well, whether they are boys, girls, as they identify, they seem to be doing on an above average indicator in terms of how well they're doing. Is that fair to say, or how else would you characterize the results in a way that the viewers can understand?
Uh, Compared to the biases that we brought in at the beginning, where we expected a lot of scores in the lower quartile ranges, maybe yes. But I think the takeaway for us has been that the students from an Indian context tend to show more social awareness and more empathy towards others in terms of the kind of items that were being tested on. And when it comes to the self or kind of introspecting on their own personal behaviors, on their own personal aspirations, etc., the awareness is kind of low. So it just kind of gave us a better direction in terms of the focus areas or the kind of programs that we need to kind of develop that allow students to kind of focus a little bit more on the self, and also from a decision-making standpoint. Maybe it's the context of the schools, or maybe it's the fact that this peer learning, etc., does take place in this age group in particular a lot, which is why the social awareness or the social kind of peer-to-peer support areas kind of rate higher compared to the self-standard piece. So that would be our main two takeaways in terms of what the study is trying to tell us.
Got it. We have one quick question on this before we move to the OECD from one of our viewers. Does the study account for nuances and opposing interpretation of certain words, such as what is wrong, like when you said in your example? For example, is motivational distortion measured, or do we account for it in any way through our psychometric practices?
Sorry, I didn't get the question clearly. So what is the question?
In there could be various opposing interpretation of some words in the items themselves, such
Correct.
as if somebody asks me to do something wrong, I would
Correct.
do it or not, as in your example you had shared. So
Correct.
what
Correct.
is wrong may definitely be culture to
Yeah,
culture,
yeah.
certain differences. So does
Right.
our item and study account for it?
Right. So I think from the data collection point, we make sure that every question is read properly to the student, and we also give them chance to ask in case in case any word is unclear, or in case they are confused about something. So from that sense, we sort of try to resolve it, but specifically when it comes to the interpretation of students, I think this is slightly a limitation of self-report, because we do expect that the participant is being honest with the responses, and also has understood or is able to comprehend what they're answering. So apart from these two things, I don't think we are factoring in any other aspects, because this is also something that we mentioned in the limitations of the report, that a self-report tool will have certain kind of issue. Also, I think it's more of a perception scale, right? So there is more room for people to interpret it in certain ways and respond. So that is a strength and a weakness at the same time.
Got it. Thanks. And I see that as one of the comments from the co-authors of the report. I'll now shift the focus to the OECD and the research that we are seeing from different parts of the world. So Noemi, over to you. Please tell us where we are today in terms of social emotional scores across different geographies.
Yeah, wonderful. And I think I have good news. I think my internet connection in that room is stable. And I apologize for the glitches earlier. Okay, so let me share my slides. I have some findings to show you. Here we go. Yes. So here you can see, so the 5 domains that I mentioned earlier that we are measuring as part of the survey on social emotional skills. With the domain, so 2 domains relating to social skills. So it's collaboration in green and engaging with others in blue. And you can also see more the emotional domains with the domain of task performance in red and emotional regulation in yellow, and finally the domain of open-mindedness with skills such as curiosity, creativity. So keep that in mind, because they will appear on the next few slides. Just to give you an overall idea of what are the education systems that participated in the first 2 rounds, we had like more than 23 education systems participating, and you can see that Delhi in India participated. And thanks to the contribution of Dream a Dream, who was our local partner for the implementation of the survey there. So how do social emotional skills relate to students' educational outcomes? You can see on that chart that students with greater social emotional skills tend to achieve better grades in reading, math, and arts. And there are 5 skills that are particularly important for academic achievements, and you can see they're on the left-hand side of the chart. Those are achievement, motivation, persistence, curiosity, responsibility, and self-control. But we also found that these skills matter for all student groups. So these 5 skills, so they matter for the younger and the older cohorts, so the 10 and 15-year-olds. They also matter for advantaged and disadvantaged students and girls and boys. So if you want to develop, for instance, academic achievements in all these groups, investing in social emotional skills is a key lever, regardless of the group you target. What's also interesting is that these skills, they matter in all countries. You can see Delhi on the left-hand side, so which means that social emotional skills matter even more in Delhi to boost academic performance than in Gunma, for instance, on the right-hand side. So it seems that these skills are particularly valued by the education system in Delhi, which is interesting. Today is Child's Day, and I will also show you how social emotional skills relate to students' well-being. And you can see that social emotional skills also matter for students' well-being. So here you can see that I selected those skills that are strongly related to teachers adopting healthy behaviors, reporting high levels of well-being, and also low levels of test and class and anxiety. And you can see that skills in the domain of emotional regulation matter a lot. I also wanted, because it's Child Day, I also wanted to show you some statistics about levels of healthy behaviors and how they vary across sites. And you can see that in Delhi, there is a high share of students reporting that they skip breakfast most days. So we have 56% of students reporting so. I don't know, maybe they have breakfast at school a bit later. You may have contextual information I don't have here, but that was a bit striking. And we also have, interestingly, not relatively fewer students in Delhi compared to the other countries reporting that they do not eat fruit or vegetables, which is a good thing. And then we also have like high shares of students, unfortunately, in Delhi reporting that they don't exercise that much. 33% of students saying that they exercise once a week or less. And also relatively high share of students getting less than 8 hours of sleep. In Delhi, it's 50%. It's not so bad in comparison to other countries. Again, we have very high share of students lacking sleep in Gunma in Japan in comparison. What was striking from the findings of the survey on social emotional skills is that disadvantaged students report lower levels of all skills on average. And you can see that actually disadvantaged students report lower levels of skills. Some skills we see a larger gap, and those are on the left-hand side of the chart. So you can see for creativity, tolerance, assertiveness, curiosity, etc. We see largest socioeconomic gaps. Colleagues earlier in this panel discussed also important gender differences in terms of social emotional skills. This is also something that we find in the OECD survey on social emotional skills. We found, for instance, that on average across all sites, boys report lower levels of tolerance and empathy compared to girls. And girls also report lower levels of skills in the domain of emotional regulation. So boys report lower levels of skills that are important for social relationship, I would say, and social skills, tolerance, empathy, while girls struggle with emotional regulation. So that's quite interesting. Interestingly, though, the gender differences they vary across countries. And in Delhi, we found that the gender differences were not that big in comparison to other countries. Interestingly, in Asian countries, we found that gender differences were smaller. This is based on self-reports, but that's still interesting to see. We just released a report a couple of weeks ago about describing from the findings of social emotional, the survey on social emotional skills, what teachers and schools do in terms of social emotional learning. And I don't have much time to go through the findings, but I just wanted to flag a few recommendations that we drew from the findings. In terms of what teachers can do in their classroom and how we can support teachers with social emotional learning in their classrooms, we have come up with 5 recommendations. We found that the more teachers were giving feedback to their students, the better for their social emotional skills, especially if the feedback focuses on students' strengths. So we often focus on, areas to improve, but actually when we tell also students what they are good at, it's quite useful to build their self-confidence and to develop other skills, relationship skills and so on, to create that trust that they need to be outgoing and maintain good relationships. We also recommended to increase opportunities that teachers provide for social emotional learning in the classroom. It's important to train teachers to incorporate social emotional learning, so we need to boost their preparedness for this. And we also found that in schools where teachers and school principals agree that it's important to promote social emotional learning, then students' social emotional skills were also stronger. So it's very important to create that shared mindset within schools. We also found that teachers reported that online teaching created more of an obstacle to the development of social emotional skills during the pandemic. So we think that much work needs to be done to be able actually to leverage digital technologies to support also social emotional learning if we have to go back at some point to digital teaching. And then outside, if we zoom out a bit, the classrooms and what teachers do, there are other things that school leaders can do or the school community can do to promote social emotional skills. One thing too that is conducive of stronger social emotional skills is to promote positive relationships in school. Also to offer or support participation of students in extracurricular activities. We know that students who participate in, arts activities or sport activities, they also have stronger social emotional skills. And we also found that the rate of bullying in Delhi was particularly high compared to other countries. And so it's very important to address bullying because students who are either victims or perpetrators of bullying, they also tend to show lower levels of all skills. So it's important to address bullying and complement bullying prevention with social emotional learning. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Noemi. Really, really fascinating insights. We've got only around 10 to 12 minutes, so I request people who have joined the meeting to put their queries in the chat, and we'll request the experts to address them. But as we get, and even our viewers on Instagram as well as LinkedIn, please feel free to put your queries in the chat. We'll get them to our speakers and get them addressed to the best of our abilities. But while they do that, one thing, what's next for this? What is next for this kind of research? What is next in terms of either evolving the way we are measuring, the way we are addressing some of the limitations that both of us mentioned exist with self-report and so on? Where do we go from here? How do we use what we have done so far? What is next? So maybe Shalaka, you can start us off and then.
Sure. First of all, fantastic work, Naomi. I think it is so inspiring. The way the project is being done across countries, and it's also the slides were also well made. I think the graphs spoke for themselves. Looking at that and looking at our engagement with the topic of SEL, I think it needs to be a global movement. Because you see so many similarities across countries, wherein you see similar gender differences across countries. You also see that there are certain SEL domains which require a lot of attention, and the culture, the country, the geography doesn't matter. I think it's also the human nature, and in general the human behavior that is probably at the basis of this. So I think considering the Indian context specifically, there are 2-3 challenges which have been mentioned across different studies, which we've also mentioned in a report in the literature review. The first challenge also is that the parents are not that aware about the SEL in general, and the need to sort of focus on improving the social emotional learning. So I think as a community, of course, teachers have a role to play, schools have a role to play, policy people have a role to play, but I think children also have a strong influence at home. So I think involving parents and maybe educating parents about SEL should be one of the prime things. Second thing is also that the self-report aspect. I think we definitely need this the self-report aspect in the tools, but we can always back it up with more observation-based tools. So I think when I went through the OECD website, they have multiple questionnaires, right? They have for students, they have for parents, they have for teachers, they also have for principals. I think this approach is amazing because you are involving all the stakeholders in the process. This can happen only if we hold each other's hands. So I think that kind of an approach is something that we should focus on. And also another challenge that is mentioned in the Indian context is the teacher readiness to implement these interventions in school, because teachers are already burdened with their regular workload. And when you ask teachers to do something more, they're like, oh my god, what is this new task that we are supposed to do, right? We already have to grade so much, and there are already so many school activities that the teachers have to participate in, and especially government teachers have to also do a lot of other activities, like for example, elections are coming up, they have election duties, or there are so many other things that they have to do, right? So I think we need to also look at teachers, look at how we can involve teachers in a way wherein they don't feel stressed while implementing these interventions, but also see the benefit of this for themselves, right? Unless they see how it is going to be important to focus on their own SEL, only then the focus will come for improving the students' SEL. And the last point I feel is especially for CHISSEL, the tool that we are working on, we of course have started with Maharashtra and translating it into Marathi language. We definitely need to take it across different states, because within India itself, we will have diverse results. And considering that diversity, I think the interventions would also, later on would be, or let's say should be tailored to the students' needs. Over to
Tha-
you. Yeah.
Yeah, Noemi?
Yes, I think I second what Shalaka just shared. I would like to flag that, I mean, I mentioned this earlier in the webinar, but that at the OECD, in terms of methodology, we want to complement self-reports with more direct assessments of social emotional skills. And for the next round of the survey, we will actually directly assess empathy through situational judgment tests. So we present, students with a little scenario, and we ask them what each of the characters must be thinking to react the way they react, how to show compassion in such a situation, and so on. So we try to really test more directly their empathy as a skill. I think there is still a lot of advocacy work to be done to promote to the importance of social emotional skills, as I said, because one of the findings of the survey is that where in those schools where all staff members agree that this is important, then student skills are also higher. And I saw that in the chat there was that question about how to make sure that teachers get incentivized to invest into this. And I think the important thing is to tell them that this is not one more thing that we ask them to do. It should be part of their regular classes. There is some research, especially done by Stephanie Jones and her team at the CHISSEL lab at Harvard Graduate School of Education, that shows that if teachers are, very explicit about their intention to develop those skills in their classes. So let's say you are teaching math and you say, okay, maybe there will be challenges when you have to, solve that mathematics problem. And so you will really develop here your perseverance, your curiosity to look for, alternative solutions. Maybe you will solve that problem as a group. So you will also develop like your social skills. So as long as you are being very explicit, very intentional about the development of those skills, and as long as you create like a safe space to do that, it should have much more of your time. It shouldn't add much more on your workload, and I believe the outcome of such a way to proceed will be very positive. So those are my thoughts.
Awesome. Anirudh, anything you want to add? What do you think should come next in the collective endeavor?
I think a focus also kind of has to come towards the policymakers, right? I mean, majority of the SEL programs, at least from an Indian context, has primarily been externally driven. You have Dream a Dream, you have Magic Bus, you have a lot of NGOs like us also kind of helping create content. I think with the NEP kind of bringing back this focus, I think a lot of work also kind of has to go into helping the policymakers and the educators kind of creating simple interventions that the teachers can just kind of quickly deploy into the classroom. And that's where a tool like CHISSEL or maybe any other tool will kind of help. So I think one of our focus areas is primarily going to be is that can we kind of just take this tool, take it to the policymakers and give them a broad direction in which they can start. So over time, we can kind of start incorporating elements like, for example, bullying, which the CHISSEL tool kind of doesn't necessarily cover today. But over time, we can just kind of build the capacity of the overall education system to kind of move towards those aspects as well, wherein it's not just the FLN-based academic concepts being measured in depth, it's also the larger social emotional piece as well. And I think it's also incorporating into other things. I think, like Naomi rightly said, some of these things should be part of the normal instruction in the classroom in terms of how teacher conducts. I think like when one of the programs that we have, wherein we have the classroom observation tool, it also kind of looks for how is the teacher kind of creating a positive environment in the classroom? Is the teacher kind of treating students with respect? Is there a social emotional aspect being built? It also kind of talks about how critical thinking as a skill is being developed into students. Are the students kind of asking open-ended questions? I think if our entire teacher professional development and our curriculum pedagogy pieces not on focus should not only focus on just the content of the subject or the chapter being taught, but if it also incorporate these soft skills in terms of how the teacher can kind of manage and navigate through these pieces, then SEL doesn't kind of become like a standalone program that needs to be run. It will always be part of every kind of intervention that the teacher is driving. And I think that is where the motivation piece will also come in. Teachers won't feel like this is an added burden. It's just something that can just be accounted for in terms of the normal day-to-day work that they carry. But I think, yeah, I mean, for me, at least from an NGO standpoint or for somebody working from a government ecosystem standpoint, I think the focus should be on the policymakers a little bit as well for them to kind of get involved into this on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Got it. Thank you. I mean, just to take it forward, yes, there has to be some sort of a not looking at it through an external lens where it's an add-on, but integrating it into performance standards or whatever you call it, teacher competency frameworks, and ensuring that that is something that is happening. Strong buy-in from the policymakers, ensuring that I think, which is what more and more measurement will do. What we notice through some other intervention is that once you start putting reliable measurements in front of the bureaucrats and policymakers, this starts getting taken seriously, and then collectively we sit with experts and figure out a way how that can be introduced to the schools, whether it is inclusive education, specific learning disabilities, social emotional skills. All of these things are a necessary component of education and not just subject knowledge. I think broadening all of our horizons and views, that it is not just about academic success. In fact, academic success itself hinges on a lot of these socio-emotional skills. So that is a really big takeaway that I'm walking away with. But any closing thoughts, Noemi, we'll start with you. And then Shalaka, we have 1 minute. So any quick take, advice to the people working in this field on how we should be looking at socio-emotional learning?
Yes, well, I think we really need to team up. This was also mentioned by Shalaka, that teachers, parents, school leaders, children themselves, we all need to think, okay, what are the opportunities available right now to develop those skills at home, in school, in extracurricular activities with friends and so on. And so we need to be more aware collectively, and so everybody needs to team up. And I think promoting also that dialogue, so that that teachers see also parents view as enriching their own view, and vice versa. But the children's social emotional skills, I think, would be very valuable.
Thanks, Shalaka.
Very quickly, we need more webinars like these so that people can come together and share their perspectives and learn from each other. I think not only webinars, but in general, considering the academic part as well, we need dedicated conferences, symposiums, conclaves, wherein people from different walks of lives, also the teachers themselves, can come and talk about their challenges in their learnings. So as Naomi already mentioned, more dialogue and good teamwork, and we all should work on our SEL as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Self-awareness begins at home, like everything else. Anirudh, any last words before we close the webinar?
I mean, Shalaka, I think covered pretty well. I think the idea is just to try more. The more evidence that we kind of gather kind of helps us more. It helps us design better interventions. I think between a lot of multiple NGO partners, if we can adopt from each other's learnings, I think it's going to be better for the larger ecosystem instead of everybody trying to reinvent the wheel. So the kind of lessons that I would now take in from the OECD framework that's been developed, off of the CHISSEL framework, etc., I think it'll be nice if collaboration kind of comes back into the fore.
Great. And that is also one of those indicators of social-emotional skills. So let's exercise
Yes.
that aspect of SEL among all of us. We really
Teamwork.
open up to collaboration, whether in different regions in India, whether different regions in Maharashtra, and involving global partners. We would love to collaborate. So please do write into us, reach out through our website, through our LinkedIn handles, and we will see how we can keep these conversations going and take it forward. With that, thanks to each one of you. Thanks to the speakers, Anirudh, Shalaka, Noemi. It was really good engaging with you over the past 1 hour. I didn't realize how quickly talking about statistics and findings and methodology has really moved 1 hour. It was really great talking to all of you. Thanks again for being part of this.
Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
this opportunity.